Okay, so what are we doing next? Oh yeah, I was gonna make Shark Chariot. So this is a Shark Chariot list. This is gonna be tricky. This is a Shark Chariot list that we sat down and started building the other day. What I'm going to do, I'm gonna do a style of deck building where, and I kind of like doing this when it's a harder build, when it's something that I need to think about a lot, but I'm basically gonna put every considerable option into the list and then cut down from there. We're gonna have like a 70 card list, by the way. It's gonna be kind of crazy. So you guys can just call them out if you see them, but like Darkwater Scourge is a really big option. We've got Deathmark as an option. I don't like it as a 3 of. I think it's almost certainly bad as a 3 of, but it could actually be like a 2 of or a 1 of. Shadow Assassin almost certainly doesn't fit in this list. It's a good card, but this list is probably a little tight to run Shadow Assassin. I don't know, dude. This is such a crazy list. There's so many different abilities for this list to be good, right? It has so much potential. And here's Oblivious Islander. I actually think Oblivious Islander is probably not correct in this list, the more I think about it. Shadow Fiend, I think we can dismiss up front. Like, I think there's no version of the deck that should be running Shadow Fiend. It's just not worth it. Even like Rush is considerable. Like, there's nothing wrong with running Rush, right? Like, it's pretty unlikely it'll be good, but it's not unconsiderable. Fading Memories is already in. Just like, we basically just need to look at this. Even like Black Spear. Again, I just don't think this list has enough room to fit in a card like this. Move the lists. Yeah, thanks. Let's go ahead and close out the tier list for now, because we're going for the full build here. You know, there's some like general value stuff. There's Glimpse Beyond, which again I think just can't work with this. There are so many ways to build this deck. There really are. I'm a big fan of Rekindler. It's all about Hacker M. If he gets answered, playing Rekindler next turn is Craigasm. I could see that. It would definitely be more like a 1 of, or maybe possibly a 2 of, but I could totally see that. So the first step. So deck building 101, in Runeterra especially. The first step is look at all your options, okay? So this is how we're going to construct this deck. We're going to look at all of our like considerable options. I'm going to like skip ones like, you know, obviously like some of them are, you know, like Shadow Fiend we can already skip just because we've thought about the concept of the card a lot and just decided even in any option he's not really worth playing. Even Navori Highwayman could actually make sense in a more aggro version of the list that uses, you know, the kind of top end finisher. And then the second step, which is pretty important, is Stirred Spirits and Vile Feast are maybe okay. Deny is a pretty major consideration, should probably fit into the deck to some capacity. These are all just kind of like weak cards. Mist's Call. So Mist's Call is almost certainly bad, I think. I'm going to put it in for now, because right now we're just in brainstorm mode. Like, I'll come back to it later. I just want all the potential cards, like, in my list right now to start, right? Onslaught of Shadows. Again, I think this is bad, but I'll put it in. Right now, like, what I'm doing in the deck builder is... I kind of started on a bad foot, but my process is I'm going to make, like, 3 of cards that I think are almost certainly going to be in the list. Like, these might be down to 2. 2 of cards are cards that I'm considering at a high potential, and 1 of cards are cards that I probably don't think will fit in the list, but I'm just going to put them there anyway. And these are just more for me to remember, like, what different cards are, rather than, you know, like, obviously, that's not, like, what it will translate to when it finishes, right? So, Splinter Soul. How does Splinter Soul work? When you summon a Shark Chariot with Soul, does it revive as a 3/3? Or, sorry, a 3/1? Even if it does, I think Splinter Soul is just too bad. Missed Call, maybe we can just delete at this point. Revive a random ally that died this round. Like, it's a little too expensive for what it does. A little too reactionary. No reason to put it in that place to begin with. I think Shadow Shift is almost certainly bad. The card's not even good in a normal scenario. This deck is tight and it doesn't have enough like explicit synergy with it. Chronicler of Ruin I don't think really fits this playstyle at all either. Kinko Wayfinder, no. Kinko Lifeblade is underrated, but no. The box actually might be good. I think this card is straight up nuts. And the more I think about this deck, the more you could actually fit in a 3rd speed, okay? Are you just really just theory crafting for a game coming out in a month's time? Yeah. It's longer than a month. This game's not going to come out for at least 2 months, I think. But it's still fun to do this. Even like Will of Ionia. So here's the question. Box seems like a meta option, somewhat. So the most important thing to understand while we're doing step 1 is to understand what step 2 is. Step 1 is just putting all the options in. And the reason we do step 1 is because step 2 is decide the speed at which we want to play the deck, right? Is this an aggro deck? Is this a mid-range deck? Or is this maybe a control deck? And as you look at Hecarim, you probably think immediately it's either mid-range or aggro, and that's probably true. But to be honest, I don't think there's anything really terribly wrong with playing this as at a slower speed, right? It's a burst deck. When I say aggro, control, and mid-range, I'm more so referring at like the speed you're kind of really trying to come online and close games out, more so than anything else, right? Which is not like how all people use those words. But yeah, the point is, like, you're always going to combo people down with Hecarim, but depending on how you define aggro, that can be aggro speed if you're just killing on turn 6, the turn you drop Hecarim. Like a grindy chariot spam deck. Exactly, that's exactly right, the Mike Wizard. You could build this as like a grindy chariot spam deck. Shadow Isles has a lot of control tools. Even Ionia has some decent control tools. I think that at the end of the day, control is just not going to be really good. Like, you're not going to want to grind them down that hard. So cards like slow speed cards, I think, are just not going to happen. But at the very least, we should think about it a little bit before we dismiss the option. But even like slightly more slow cards can work in like a mid-range style deck. Like the box could be totally fine for something that plays for like mid-range. Will of Ionia as well is a card that I think just won't fit into this deck. I don't like Grasp of Undying here either. I don't even know why I clicked that in. Okay, so it's all about the combo. And here you look at Tortured Prodigy and you actually think to yourself, wow, maybe I could use this card. Because Tortured Prodigy can actually be good. How can Control be tier 2 then? What do you mean by that? I don't see the connection. Possession, a little too slow for how this deck wants to play, I think. It's gotta be for sure. Thresh over Zed in a control version? So that's an interesting question, and I think so, yes. In a control-y version of this, you would probably run Thresh over Zed. Absolutely. Like, Zed can't really work unless you're trying to kill at aggro speeds. And Zed is pretty efficient. So here's the thing. You look at this deck and you look at Zed and you're like, wow, Zed is like, it has synergy. Because this deck, you know, you have the... I'm going to put Possession in, and I'm going to put... Will of Ionia back in. I'll keep Grasp of the Undying out, though. Black Spear should be in. But again, I don't want to rule out anything yet. I literally don't, right? Even like Dawn of Dusk could fit in more slow versions of the deck, right? So again, step 1, just put in all the options. Rekindler, we talked about that before. Sure. Raza, you know, like a control-y version. Why the heck not? Like, absolutely. Why not? Vengeance could be okay. Ladros could be kind of okay. Spectral Matron could be kind of okay. And Ruination could be kind of okay. Pretty unlikely that all of those are going to be decent, but Mina Swiftfoot is actually a pretty good like control late game finisher if you want it. So as you see, like I said, I said I was going to be at 70 cards. I'm at 70 cards in this deck right now. So this is step 1. Just put in all the ideas for your deck that plays at 3 speeds. You don't know which speed your deck plays in that. Now, step 2 is going through the cards that you have, maybe trimming the fat a little bit. Definitely, like, you're rethinking a couple of the things you put in, and you're thinking, like, okay, I probably don't want this even, like, at the speed that it would be good in. Like, I'm looking at Oblivious Islander. So this card wouldn't play at the control speed. I think its best speed is aggro, because it's kind of like a 0 mana 2/1. And I don't think I would play this at mid-range speed either, honestly. So the question is, we can look at Oblivious Islander. Would we even play this in an aggro-y version? Like, that's the question. Because I looked at this card in the aggro version, and there was a lot of opportunity to run different things, and especially after we took out Shadow Fiend, I started not liking this card more and more. And I think more and more Oblivious Islander should probably be out. Like, a conditional 0 mana 2/1 isn't even that good of a card. Like, you're only getting... I say 0 mana because you kind of discount your Chariot, but you're kind of getting that 1 mana next turn, which is not as good as 0 mana. I think we can just kick Islander. I honestly think this card isn't even really good in any speed of the deck. It's close in aggro, but even there, I think it probably does make the cut. Glimpse Beyond, we can cut from a 3 of. Just again, these are just keeping in mind like how I see, you know, these cards. And even Iron Harbinger, like when I look at this card, it doesn't really feel that good. Shadow Assassin might play, you know, decently at like a control-y speed, and even Zed, maybe we're not thinking above now. So the way I look at this deck, I think like what I would consider to be an aggro speed simply doesn't work for this deck, right? The one thing that carries it is Zed, because Zed is OP. That's just easy. Zed is literally OP. That's the one thing that makes this deck work at an aggro speed. But now let's look at Zed and think about what the synergy that this is basically creating is actually doing for this deck. So, I mean, you know, the deck runs ephemerals, and Zed clones an ephemeral, but what's really happening there? Well, when Zed attacks, it summons a Shark Chariot. Sure, that's nice. Honestly, that doesn't usually happen. A bigger thing is, like, you know, it works with Soul Shepherd. So, I mean, even in a mid-range speed, Zed would be nuts. The one thing Zed doesn't really work with is the control speed. At the control speed, you probably wouldn't run 3 Zed. Honestly, Zed is kind of too nuts. The control speed of this deck might literally just not work just because of how nuts Zed is, right? Summons Unit, Sparring Student, and Greenglade. Yeah, and Sparring Student and Greenglade are also very good units for aggro speed as well. And they work with the kind of the swarm identity of this deck because it plays a lot of things. So I do think control speed is probably out. I think that, like, this deck, Zed is a little too efficient. Your swarm options are a little too efficient. I think you're looking at, like, aggro speed or mid-range speed probably. And personally, I think that just the fact that it even has a 6-drop in it, I might disqualify that from my definition of aggro. Nobody really knows what aggro means yet. Like, I think aggro needs to be able to kill things before turn 6, like, as an option. And Hecarim being 6-drop means that kind of won't happen. Like, I mean, it could happen if your opponent's really weak, but anything can happen, right? Like, realistically, you won't be killing your opponent before turn 6. But you've got high odds of killing them exactly on 6. So it's pretty aggressive. I wouldn't call it a not aggro deck. So at this point, I think we're rolling. I think we can rule out the control version. I think there's not enough reason for it. Hecarim is killing things too fast. Zed is a little too efficient. And the way Ephemerals wants to play also, you know, kind of, it plays at a faster speed. You know, you've got a lot of cards like Soul Shepherd, Shark, Silent Shadowseer, some elusives that are going to be making the game end like faster, right? Control doesn't want to be playing concepts like elusive or Zed. Those concepts are not. Sometimes attack can be defensive, right? A really good example of that would be Glory Seeker. Let me go ahead and set the filter to include Noxus, which Glory Seeker is in. This is like damage that's not really aggressive, because it's Challenger, it's just removal, right? This is more akin to a 2-mana spell that does 5 damage, which is pretty nuts, and that's why this card is crazy, right? Of course it's counterable. Like, you can play this and they can play a ping and stop your spell. They can kind of deny your spell with more things, which is why it costs 2 mana. But this card is a nuts control card, right? This is a control card, even though it does damage. The way it deals damage makes it control-y. The way it has attack makes it control-y, right? Then you look at, you know, the idea of playing something more like... Let's get the filters out of here. You look at the idea of playing something like elusives. Obviously, they have damage, but the entire point of elusive is to deal face damage, which means you're closing out games early. Elusives are very bad for like the decks that want to play at a slow speed, right? Typically, because if you have elusives and you're dealing chip damage to face anyway, you can close out games sooner, and there's no reason to play like things that are stalling that late, right? So elusives are more conducive to a mid-range or aggro deck. And Zed is also, you know, very aggressive, obviously. Like, the only reason for him is, like, he gains extra attacks on his stats. And then, you know, intrinsic to the idea of ephemerals, we've also got Mentor, or sorry, not Mentor, but we've got Student and Greenglade Duo. These cards scale per unit played. You spam a lot of units with these cards. And these cards are very aggressive. They're cheap, they gain attack. So I think that this deck could definitely work as a mid-range speed kind of deck, because it does have a lot of good mid-range too. Like stuff like Hecarim that drops here is mid-range. Shadow Isles in general just has great options for all speeds. And then you've got like combos like Darkwater into Deathmark, which I think is better at like a more mid-range skewing deck than an aggro skewing deck, I guess I would say. But let's go ahead and go into step 3, which is rule out the idea of any of the speeds. Usually this will be, firstly, ruling out one speed. Because I think, like, on average, most decks can actually be played at, like, 2 different speeds. Like, you can play a deck at, like, aggro or mid-range speed, or you can play a deck at, like, mid-range or control speed. You know, you usually have that one option. Sometimes you don't. Some decks you just have to play in a certain way, basically, and it's kind of obvious when that happens. But yeah, we can rule out our top end. That being said, we haven't ruled out mid-range yet, so maybe something like Will of Ionia, Dawn of Dusk, and Rekindler we can actually maybe still keep, right? And the same is true for like Deathmark Darkwater Scourge could still work in a more mid-rangey version. Even like Shadow Assassin, which I find pretty unlikely, could still maybe work. So we're at 58 out of 40 cards now, if you see behind my EG ad reel. Okay, so now we get into basically step 4, which is where the paths diverge. At this point, I don't like the idea of looking at this deck and saying, okay, it should be aggro or it should be mid-range. That's what we did before. That was step 3. We kind of ruled out control by that logic. But step 4 is a little bit different. And the reason why is pretty simple. Because I want to build both. At the end of the day, the first one is easy to rule out, I think. But to rule out the second one, you have to decide, first of all, it could be a meta call. Sometimes the speed will just come down to what speed you want for that meta, for sure. But typically, you'll want the best version of the deck. And if you want to play a different speed, you play a different deck. That's usually how it works. Usually. It usually doesn't come down to that meta call. So, we look at this deck, and we're like, okay, we've got some aggro tools, we've got some mid-range tools. Honestly, at this point, I'm kind of leaning to a more, like, aggro-y deck. But, we're not sure. I want to build both, and once I've built both, I can compare both. And again, even if one is better than the other after that comparison, building them is the easiest way to make that comparison. And on top of that, you also have the idea of maybe I just want both decks to exist because of that meta call, right? Who knows? So at this point, the paths diverge. We're going to build 2 decks. We're going to build an aggro deck. We're going to build a mid-range deck. Doesn't really matter what we start with. Let's go ahead and build our aggro version of this list, okay? And I don't want this to be too long. So, you know, maybe I'll just do one or the other or something like that for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into... I don't want to discard this. Let's just go ahead and save this as a draft. I mean, honestly, like, I don't think I need this anymore. I'm basically gonna just discard this and go into the aggro version. So let's just build what I would consider to be the aggro version of the list right now. The aggro version is gonna run Deny. The aggro version is not... I think it can't run Deathmark and Darkwater Scourge. I do not like this combo in the aggro version at all. However, I have been liking Deny. Vile Feast doesn't work very well in aggro. The Vori Highwayman, I think, is just not synergistic enough. Like, as adorable as it is, and it is really adorable, and it does work with Mentor, you've got other things that work with Mentor, and this is an extremely tight deck. Like, this is a high synergy concept. I don't think it's going to be possible to fit in cards that don't play for super high synergy, right? That being said, honestly, I've been looking at Iron Harbinger as a potential cut. So then we get to Stirred Spirits, which I think I don't really like this card, just at all. Maybe I'm wrong. This is a card that I personally haven't really played around with, and we're gonna have to think about like how this one works a bit, right? You felt gifted a tier 1 sub to Voldemar Lemberg. Yo, Voldemar Lemberg, welcome to the 1/8 Gay Club, buddy, and thanks for the gift sub, Feldy. Okay, so we've got the Rekindler and Dawn and Dusk. Okay. So these are like kind of slower tools. Dawn and Dusk is kind of hilarious, but in an aggro version, Hecarim definitely wants to be kind of my top end finisher. I don't want something reactive like the box either. I want to be playing like very proactive, very low to the ground, and then just slap Hecarim down on 6. So I could see the idea of running like 1 Rekindler. I don't think I like it in like an actual aggro version. Like if this deck wants to be able to kill at aggro speeds, I don't like one version of the Rekindler. Onslaught of Shadows, I think that this card is just kind of bad. If you haven't noticed, I didn't say it, but we're coming back to Stirred Spirits later because I'm not actually sure about that card. It could maybe fit in, right? And Deny is more of a 2-of than anything else usually. We can put the 3rd copy of Zed back in. I cut it down to a 2 just to make a point earlier. Okay, and we can keep Shadow Assassin for now, but realistically, I don't think this card's going to make the cut either. So Onslaught of Shadows summons for 3 mana 2 Spectral Riders at 3/3 each. And to be honest, when I look at this card, I'm not necessarily convinced it is worse than Haunted Relic. Why do people like Haunted Relic better than Onslaught of Shadows? The biggest reason seems to be just like chump blocking, basically. Because you use this like defensively to kind of stay alive when your opponent isn't attacking you. But as an aggro deck, you don't necessarily want like too many defensive options. So an Absorb Soul is out too. Rush actually totally could be in. Absolutely. Grant an ally +3/+3 and Ephemeral could stay in. And Fading Memories could be in. It's kind of only good when you draw Shark Chariot, which is dangerous as a concept. You don't really want something that's only good when you draw Shark Chariot. Basically. Because games where you don't draw Shark Chariot are often like where you're going to be losing anyway. So Fading Memories, like, let's think, what can it do that's not just cloning Shark Chariot? Create an ephemeral copy in hand. So it's just another copy of Shark Chariot, or it's another copy of Shadowseer. And I really, really don't like that as a card. When I already have one Shark Chariot, I just want stuff that's going to be more reliably doing things, right? Like, that's pretty important. So let's get Fading Memories out of here. And again, we're below 40 now, but that's because a lot of our 3-ofs aren't 3-ofs yet, right? Like, we don't have, you know, we don't have, like, Inspiring Mentor as a 3-of, and I think Mentor wants to be a 3-of. Could actually not be true, but pretty sure Mentor is more of a 3-of than anything else. Okay, Mark of the Owls, I think is not a 3-of, personally. And, you know, you can look at Mark of the Owls and Rush and kind of see them sort of similarly. I personally, Mark of the Owls kind of gives you that, like, final reach, whereas Rush is just better for, like, when they try to, like, get efficient blocks. To be perfectly honest, I kind of like Rush better than Mark of the Owls. I'm not gonna lie. Like, the ability to, like, get those efficient blocks out, I think just does more than have this, like, little bit of reach at the very end of the game. Swim is not playing this game at all and just theory crafting. How's that going to work without testing? If your theory craft is good enough, you don't need to test. Now, obviously, that's kind of a meme statement because at the end of the day, like, no, like, that's pretty theoretical. Like, nobody's theory crafting is good enough that they don't need to test at all. But I can still go pretty far without testing. Like, these decks aren't going to be perfect, but they're going to be very well refined, right? And I'm kind of explaining, like, a lot of the thought process that goes into deck building anyway. Okay. So I think Shadow Assassin is likely going to be out, but we can keep it in for now. We've got, you know, some other, like, kind of non-synergistic options, like Ravenous Butcher as well. There's nothing wrong with putting, like, Butcher combo in this deck, or even, like, Navori Blade Scout, like, that kind of just, like, aggro tools that these regions both share that aren't really synergistic to the overall game plan, I think would be fine to think about. But at this point, we basically want to be considering Onslaught of Shadows versus Haunted Relic, because we only want one or the other. Relic is basically defensive. It can work better if you're in turn getting like a bit aggro down. It basically stops certain people from attacking on certain turns, which I think is fairly low value. To be perfectly honest, the more I play this list, the more I don't really like Haunted Relic in it, effectively. It's like, if they're a deck that's faster than you, yeah, you get to stop them for attacking for one turn. But it might be a better idea to just develop like an efficient blocker. Like, if you're using Relic defensively, you'd be better off literally playing, like, a Scaled Snapper. Because Scaled Snapper actually just stops decks that try to get under you, right? Because this deck is an aggro deck, but it still sometimes loses that race, right? So, it is a deck that doesn't really have a lot of anti-aggro tools. The thing is, if you're going to put an anti-aggro tool in, Haunted Relic doesn't really do much. It's not really a great finisher. You want to be using Open Attack. And if you're using it offensively, you're better off using Onslaught of Shadows. Haunted Relic is good at, like, triggering deaths, but I think this card is actually just bad. I've seen some people run it in their list, and I actually, the more I think about it, the more I see no reason this should be in an aggro version of the list, right? Like, what's the point of this? What is this accomplishing? Like, it's supposed to be an anti-aggro tool, but it kind of fails as that. I'd rather have a Scaled Snapper. As an offensive tool, I'd rather have an Onslaught of Shadows. And you might say, well, but what if it's a middle ground? At the end of the day, middle grounds are usually bad. They can be good if they're good enough, but usually, like, unless it's just a really good card, you don't want something that doesn't really fulfill one specific function or another, right? You want something that has a purpose. And Relic, I think, has zero purpose. I think this card is just bad. All it can do is stop something from attacking for one turn at 2 mana. It doesn't really give you, like, a good way to push for lethal. It does have cute synergy with, like, Sparring Student and Greenglade Duo, but it almost... So when you think about it, you look at Sparring Student and Duo, and you're like, wow, the more units I play, the more they get better, so I want to play things that make a lot of units. And that's true to a degree, but when you're looking at something whose entire value is wrapped up in the idea of getting 3 units, suddenly you look at your board and you're like, wow, I actually don't have room for all of this. Because these two are synergizing with the component of my deck that's spamming a lot of units, then the component of my deck that's spamming a lot of units becomes anti-synergistic with the component of my deck that's spamming a lot of units. Because the more units you have, the less room you have for more units you have. So you have a synergy, but the way the synergy works is it's indirectly anti-synergistic, right? If that makes sense. And so that argument gets kind of destroyed. So you look at Haunted Relic and you just think, like, why is this in the list? Like, it kind of doesn't make sense. If I want anti-aggro, Scaled Snapper is a fantastic option. And you might say, well, but the Ephemeral Synergy. Well, the Ephemeral Synergy doesn't really work if we're thinking about an anti-aggro tool, right? Ephemeral Synergy only helps push for lethal. Ephemeral Synergy is just for, like, what is it for? Soul Shepherd and Shark Chariot. And Shark Chariot, usually I'll have an Ephemeral attacking. It's really weak synergy, because with Shark Chariot, all you need is one Ephemeral attacking, so it's diminishing returns on that synergy. Soul Shepherd is nice, but again, giving your blockers +1/+1 doesn't really help. And if they're attackers, I'd rather they just be Onslaught of Shadows. I'm probably going to cut this card too, by the way. But I might keep one of it around for now. We'll see. But yeah, Haunted Relic is just out. I think that's an easy decision. Darkwater Scourge and Deathmark are potentially up. I took them out of the deck because I don't think they fit the aggro playstyle, like, basically at all. They're a little too slow for how aggro wants to play, and again, you can look at Darkwater Scourge as an anti-aggro tool, so it's basically got Lifesteal and Ephemeral. If I play this, I really like the very interesting thing about Ephemeral, and why I love this as a concept, this concept exists in other games, right? The idea of it's going to die at the end of the round, but the difference is it's a completely different concept in this game. In this game, depending on whether you play this on attack or defense, it does a completely different function, right? It's either like, you know, an open attack delayer that has the ability to develop a unit that can only attack for that turn, or it's something that you can only do when your opponent doesn't open attack on defense, where you have the ability to block for that turn, right? And that's really interesting. That's why Ephemeral's cool. So you look at Darkwater Scourge, you're like, okay, this has the ability to be played, you know, on offense. Let's evaluate that. So I play it on offense before an open attack. I dome my opponent with Lifesteal for 5. They probably don't even take, like, they might chump it with like a 1/1. But against like an aggro deck, I'm basically playing a 3-mana thing that smacks your face and swings for potentially like 10 life. Wow, that's pretty good. The ability for this to be like an efficient anti-aggro tool is fairly solid, right? And I don't think I want to run Deathmark because I think it's still a little too clunky, but the ability to just like kind of outrace aggro is really strong here, right? Let's look at this defensively. The opponent basically doesn't open attack. They're on like turn 3 or turn 4. They play a unit, and I play Darkwater. Maybe they don't want to attack with anything at that point. That's also pretty good. So what I see Darkwater as is basically an anti-aggro tool. It gives you lifesteal, which is good when opponents are trying to come under you. And again, I really would recommend, this is a basic way of looking at the game, but it's the most important first way. Looking at the game in terms of different speeds, right? It's like, you're going to play your deck at a certain speed, and you're going to need solutions to things that play faster and things that play slower. Now, this deck is a pretty aggro deck. But there's still going to be decks that play even more aggressive than this, because I have a lot of my value is just completely dedicated to my top end, and I have no real defensive potential. So even though I'm an aggro deck, there's still decks that come under me, decks that play faster under curve, and will mess me up. And I do need a couple of answers against those, right? Darkwater Scourge is a pretty good answer. Now, let's go ahead and compare that to Scaled Snapper right now, which we were talking about before. Scaled Snapper stays permanently on my board. This is a 3-mana 2/5 instead of being a 3-mana 5/5. Disregard this first ability. This first ability is completely useless. I know people are looking, but it has the ability to switch. You don't give a shit. It doesn't matter. You actually, you might in this deck. You might in this deck. But it's still going to be, like, not why the card is in the deck, right? And it's still going to be really hard for this to connect to your opponent's face, right? It's usually just going to trade with one of their chump blockers. So, like, realistically, even when this is good, it's still really unreliable. So it's a 3-mana 2/5, basically. You compare that to Darkwater Scourge. Okay, so Scourge has the Ephemeral tag, which gives it some vague semblance of synergy with Shepherd and Chariot. But again, Chariot uses Ephemeral tag very lightly, so it's not really there. Shepherd, it's just going to be like one extra attack for like that turn. Pretty whatever. It has some synergy with Iron Harbinger, which is really light as well. But it is kind of there, right? So you've got Darkwater Scourge, that, you know, that's the Ephemeral tag, but of course it's gone after a turn. And I just don't want to run Deathmark. I know the Darkwater Scourge Deathmark combo is cute, but it's really unreliable. Like, if you draw Deathmark without Darkwater Scourge, I think it's a little too low on value. That being said, maybe we should evaluate that. Let's make sure we rule this out before, like, thinking about it more. So basically, at any point in time, I can make an Ephemeral unit not die. Making Shark Chariots not die is, I think, completely useless. I believe that's true. Like, removing the Ephemeral from Shark Chariot So when it reses, it still is ephemeral, right? I believe a revive is always a base copy and not any modified copy. It should be. So when you remove the ephemeral from like a Shark Chariot, if they don't block it, then basically it's there for defense for 1 turn. You have the ability to like kill one of the enemy units. Honestly, maybe this card is just good. Death Mark is more about killing and less about keeping alive. It's possible this card is actually just better than I give it credit for. It's possible that this deck might have to incorporate both Deathmark and Dark Water Scourge, because the combo of both of them is a huge smacker when it happens. I'm not sold on Scourge over Haunted Relic, honestly. Okay, what are you thinking then? Because, I mean, the more I think about it, the more Deathmark is actually fairly adorable. I could go like 3 Scourge, 2 Deathmark or something like that. And I could easily get out of, like, I don't know, Shadow Seer. Like, I have room. Like, the deck does have room at this point. It's always going to be... I think you're always going to find value in removing Ephemeral from an ally, I think. I've had the stream in my other monitor for like an hour and there's been 0 content. Yeah, I mean, we're not... This is a 0 gameplay stream. This is what you guys signed up for. This is what I signed up for. We all knew what we were getting into, guys. Relic and Prankster for more ways to enable Relic. I really don't like the idea of Prankster in this kind of list. It's cute, but I think this list has just like too high synergy to fit it in. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more I haven't really been liking Mark of the Isles as well. But it could go away. I think I will actually put in like 2 Deathmarks and 3 Darkwater Scourges right now. And we'll kind of see how this plays out. But I expect this to do fairly well. Is Iron Harbinger even good enough in this deck? So that's what I was thinking. And we talked about that the other day, that guy with glasses. I ended up taking Harbinger and... Because we were discussing what rating it should be. I almost gave it like an F. Because I was almost like, this isn't even like good enough for this deck. But... it ends up being good enough, I think. Just the 3-2-4 stat line alone, you know, it helps the aggro condition. Again, I need things that will help my aggro matchup. I don't think it's a 3 of, to be honest. It might not be that great, but I think it's at least like something that's considerable. Scribe of Sorrows. Create a copy in hand of an ally that died this game. We might be getting out of that too. But Deathmark seems like a solid 2 of. A little too clunky to be a 3 of, in my opinion, but we'll see. Mark of the Isles could actually be bad now. I'm feeling a bit worse about that. I honestly think I like Rush better than Mark of the Isles, personally. This gives you a bit of reach, but Rush is like a really powerful trick for earlier. But the 3 damage to face potential reach at the end is really powerful as well. There's a lot you can do with that trick as well. So the deck is getting tight. I think Stirred Spirits is probably just out at this point. I do think there's kind of no way to make this work. It's just a conditional like +2 attack only on offense as a 2/3/2. To be honest, it's not like this is bad, but I just feel like this is probably not going to fit in the final version, right? Again, the ratioing right now isn't representing what the finalized copy of the list is. It's just ones are just things that I'm like uncertain of are going to make the final list, okay? So, you know, we're back down to 40. That doesn't really matter. Right? Don't worry about how many cards you have, right? It turns your 1/1s into Chariot spawns. Oh, what? Stirred Spirits? I mean, what are my 1/1s? Like, you mean like sacrificing Mentor? So the thing about this deck is I don't think I need more ways to spawn Chariots, especially when I have put in 3 Darkwater Scourge. Like, I think I've got enough Ephemerals. I've got enough ways to spawn Chariots. I don't think I honestly need more. But we could get out of Silent Shadow Seer as well. I think Shadow Seer is pretty sweet. It feels a little hard to get out of this. And then there's Navori Conspirator, who, you know, at the end of the day, might have to be a cut. Like, the more I look at this card, it's really great, but this deck doesn't really need high power elusives as much as others. It doesn't use Inspiring Mentor, like, as effectively. And honestly, as I'm looking at Inspiring Mentor, this card might start getting cut as well, right? But the more I think about it, the more I just find that Deathmark plus Scourge is just a little too high value. And the way we evaluate that is basically 3 different ways, right? We think of 3 situations. One where you have Scourge and no Deathmark. One where you have Deathmark and no Scourge. And one where you have both, right? So this is like, you want to when you're evaluating combo specific pieces, you go ahead and think in terms of like, what is going to be like one or the other, right? So, because you can't rely on having that combo all the time, right? So you look at Darkwater Scourge by itself, hey, this is a good anti-aggro tool. And I think we're actually like fast enough at killing decks that it kind of makes up for its own downside. Because Scourge and Deathmark send this game into a bit of a slower state, and that forces us to want anti-aggro tools more. And this is great for sending our deck into a slower state. Scourge and Deathmark are pretty great. So let's say I've got Scourge only. It does pretty well. It's a great anti-aggro tool. Whether I'm attacking or defending, it's good. That's important. When you look at Stirred Spirits, this support tag is only good when you're attacking. So this is important. Scourge is only good when you're attacking, okay? Or sorry, Scourge is good. Scourge is good on both turns because you can play it on offense or on defense, and it actually has like pretty good abilities on both. And then we look at Deathmark on our own, and we evaluated this. I didn't really talk about what was happening when I was doing that, but that's why I was thinking about like, okay, how good is this if I just use it on Shark Chariot? It's not really great. If I use it without Darkwater Scourge, I don't think it's going to be high value, and that's another part of the reason why this is basically a 2 of, right? Like, so basically, you have to think about Deathmark without hitting Scourge, and that's going to be definitely weaker. You're going to have a situation where you have Deathmark's going to be hitting, like, Shark Chariot, basically, or maybe Silent Shadowseer. Like, you know, after the combat phase, like, they don't block Shadowseer, you use Deathmark, it keeps it alive, which saves a bit of mana, which is nice, and then it kills an opponent unit because they didn't block, so it's after combat phase. That's not bad. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not amazing value, but that's its floor, right? You have to consider, like, the difference, the context is everything. Like, if that's the floor of a card's value, that's fine. If that's a ceiling, that card's ass, and we kick it. But then you look at when you have both of them together. And when you have both of them together, it's nuts. When you're able to keep your Scourge alive and remove Ephemeral from it, it's actually crazy strong, right? So you have a scenario where both of them independently are good enough, you know, they work, and together they're nuts. That's really important. Now, when you look at a combo, a lot of people look at like combo, 2 cards in a combo, they're like, oh, it's so crazy when you have both of them together. But if both of them are bad on their own, you can't really run that combo. Like, not really. Some situations, like, you know, obviously it depends on the degree to which it's bad and the degree to which it's good, but for the most part, you have to look at all 3 scenarios, right? Now, the odds of drawing either one in your, you know, by the time you hit turn 3, because they're effective 3 ofs, Deathmark is a 2 of, might actually optimize as a 3 of, but I'm going to keep it at a 2 of in this version. The odds of drawing a 3 of, simple hypergeometric calculation. If you have 3 of a copy of your deck, by turn 3, you'll have very close to a 67% chance of having it in your hand, right? Which is very high. It's a lot higher than most people intuitively think. So if we're thinking about, okay, Deathmark, well, it might be brick sometimes. Well, the odds of drawing Darkwater Scourge are 67%. 2/3 by turn 3, by the time we're even able to play it, right? A bit higher after that, like 70% by relevant turns. So Deathmark has a really hard time, like, actually bricking out, right? And when we draw Scourge, it's kind of good on its own, right? And even when we don't draw Scourge with Deathmark, you know, we're probably drawing Shadowseer, and that's part of the reason Shadowseer remains in the deck. So, very, very powerful combo. And I think this defines our deck into a bit more of a mid-range speed. So this slows down the deck a bit, but these cards help me against the aggro condition, so that's totally fine. Okay, so 3 Scourge, 2 Deathmark, locked in. We're playing a bit slower speed. So now, let's look at the rest of our options. Stirred Spirits. Now, you guys are saying Stirred Spirits is just bad. I think I probably agree with that. I mean, the only reason this card, like, this deck has a lot of 2-drops already. I think this card is just trash. I kept it in as a 1-of just because I didn't want to dismiss it immediately, like 100. I didn't want to say 100% you are out of my deck yet, but yeah, that card is out of my deck. That card doesn't exist in the deck. No way. Not a chance. Okay. And now we're at 30 out of 40. We've actually freed up a little bit of room. Look at that. So Navori Conspirator is something I'm thinking about getting rid of. And I really love the idea of playing like 2 rushes. Rush is a pretty phenomenal card, honestly. This is like the best combat trick. It's just a good card. We've got a lot of cuttables, right? I'm thinking I want more than 1 Mark of the Isles and more than 1 Rush. I think I like Rush as a 2-of. Rush just like, as a card, Rush just feels like a 2-of card. If you're kind of controlling the board, you know, things are blocking you. Oops, I misclicked that. Things are blocking you. I think I definitely like the idea of just being able to like win exchanges. Now, what you might say is Rush loses value in this deck because of the ephemeral nature. So, for example, let's say we have Shark Chariot. They chump block, or not chump block, but they block with like a 4 health blocker, keep it alive. I can rush that, but then I'm keeping my Chariot alive. Part of the reason that Rush is good is because you keep things alive, and you can't keep ephemeral units alive, right? That's the entire reason for Quick Attack, to keep stuff alive. You know, I would need to keep alive my Soul Shepherd, but I'm probably not attacking with this. Although, if I have Rush, it opens me up to the ability to maybe attack with Shepherd. I think that might just be a little too risky. And you'll also notice I have a few elusives that are probably not getting blocked anyway, so Rush loses value there too. And you look at like all those factors combined and you're like, wow, so Rush on Sparring Student is really good, right? It allows this guy to get attacks in if they try to block him for like a cheeky kill. We can keep him alive, which is very powerful because he's like, you know, he's really powerful to keep alive. He's a good cheap unit, you know, he's nuts. You can use Rush on Zed. That sounds bad, honestly. It's like, well, Zed already has quick attack, but when they have a 4 health unit, the ability to attack with Zed and rush it, that's still value. 1 mana, like that's the thing about Rush, you don't need to use it for the quick attack. Like on anything that has quick attack, that 1 attack will be huge. Like there's very few things this early in the game that have 5 health. This is why Scaled Snapper and Crush Part are so good, by the way, because they have 5 health early, and Scourge perhaps. But like at most the opponent's gonna have 4 health things. So your Zed can attack with the safety of Rush giving it that 1 damage, and that's all you need, baby. You don't care that you're doubling quick attack on something that already has it. That doesn't matter, right? So Rush is really good for Zed, really good for Zed. But those are still kind of the only 2 things we can use it for here, to be honest. So I could definitely think about cutting Rush to a 1 of. That's definitely something we could do. Whereas Mark of the Isles is only really good later. For the most part, like, you can win certain exchanges with this, but I think the purpose of this card more so is to just function as like a kind of late game combat trick, just to push damage to face rather than trying to do anything else. Like most of the time you're using this card, it's as a 1 mana deal 3 to face. Which is kind of like Elixir of Wrath. Which is not good, by the way. Elixir of Wrath is a bad card. Or, I don't want to say bad, but it's not great. It's considerable, but it's not great. Now, this has the flexibility, really valuable flexibility, of being able to use, to kind of win exchanges as well. And it combos pretty well with Deathmark. You might look at Mark of the Owls and you might be like, okay, it gives that 3 health and Ephemeral. Well, it's Ephemeral, so it's going to die at the end of the turn. So the health it gives it kind of doesn't do anything, right? What does the health it gives it do? It basically allows it to work with Deathmark. And I think that's Shadow Shift. Yeah, in theory, Shadow Shift as well, but I think Shadow Shift is just a really weak card. I don't want to use Recall or Shadow Shift in this deck. Wrath that can summon Chariot. Yeah, Mark of the Owls can summon Chariot as well, which matters. But for the most part, the 3 health could combo with Deathmark or could just push damage. To be perfectly honest, I think Mark of the Isles is a very overrated card that's fairly bad. I say bad. I don't mean like I shouldn't knock. It's not to the point where I shouldn't consider it here, but I think I'm leaning towards a 0 off. I think I'm leaning towards a full cut. Because when I'm thinking about this card, it's almost just a Wrath of Elixir. Like the health doesn't really matter. The ephemeral synergy doesn't really matter. Like it doesn't really work. It doesn't work with Soul Shepherd because this is only the summon, right? And that's like mostly the ephemeral synergy right there is Soul Shepherd. It works with Shark Chariot because you have the ability to summon a chariot, but in the situations where you're using Mark of the Isles anyway, it's not going to matter. And the Shark Chariot synergy is really tenuous because usually you'll have something else ephemeral. Like the thing is, what we're cutting Mark of the Isles for can't just be something that has ephemeral, right? So the more I look at this card, the more it's kind of a bad version of Rush. It's a combat trick that can't really keep something alive, and keeping something alive is the most of the purpose of combat tricks for like Sparring Student and Zed. And even maybe Hecarim in games that are going a bit later, honestly. Like, I could even see that. But Mark of the Isles just seems like a bad bait card to me. The one thing is that when you have both it and Deathmark, it's very, very, very adorable, right? So in terms of Deathmark value, you can look at my Mark of the Isles kind of like as a fourth Darkwater Scourge. However, I think with 2 Deathmarks, and I already have these Darkwater Scourges, I think Mark of the Isles is a full cut. I actually think this card just isn't good enough to fit this list. I think this is a very high synergy list. My combat trick of choice is going to be Rush instead. This is a bit of a hot take. Pretty much everyone playing these lists is running Mark of the Isles. I don't really see Rush in these lists, so I could be wrong about that, but just in terms of thinking about it, I really don't like the idea of Mark of the Isles that much here. You can Mark of the Isles into open attack though, right? Yeah, you can. But there's no reason to do that, because you can also you want to let your opponent declare blockers first, and then use Mark on what they didn't block. The one reason you would do that is for Shark Chariot, which is what you're saying, yeah. And that would be good. More denies. Honestly, a 3rd deny is probably a good thing for this list. I think unironically, like 3 denies could be good. But I'm going to keep it at 2 for now and see what happens. Okay, so let's think then what we want in this list. So I decided I don't really like the idea of Fading Memories. I could consider it as a one of, but it's kind of only good when I've already drawn Shark Chariot. And a card that's only good when I've already drawn Shark Chariot is kind of bad. It's basically useless when I haven't. But I guess I can create a second Darkwater Scourge as well. Now that I have Darkwater Scourge in my deck, Fading Memories does get a bit better. We are going to have to look at a couple cards we dismissed before. Because when I was building this as an aggro list and when I was dismissing cards, I actually didn't look at Scourge and Deathmark as things that were going to be in my list at the time. So Fading Memories can proc Deathmark too. Yeah, Fading Memories can be used on Deathmark as well. So let me go ahead and be right back and we'll consider these up. Okay, so now we're back and we have Fading Memories. So Fading Memories, it's a Shark Chariot if I already have one, which is kind of bad. You don't really need more than 2 chariots. So if I draw 2 Fading Memories is kind of brickish, honestly. It's a Shadowseer when I already have Shadowseer, which is very bad because you really don't want more than 1 Shadowseer. It's a Darkwater Scourge when I already have Darkwater Scourge, which is honestly kind of bad too, because I also don't really want more Scourges when I have Scourge. Usually if I have 1 Scourge, I would rather have something else than another Scourge. But what Fading Memories can be is, in theory, if it can enable Deathmark if I don't have a Deathmark enabler. I can use it to enable Chariot in a pinch, but that's just dumb, I think. I think that's just bad. When I played this, I played 3 Navori Conspirator. I think that card is too nuts to be a one-of. Yeah, I mean, the card's not really a one-of in this deck right now. It's not slotted in. I haven't decided on it. But yeah, Navori Conspirator is pretty nuts. I'm down for Conspirator in this, for sure. So Fading Memories, I think, is not quite good enough to run. I think it's just like, it's just less value than any like average card would be in my list. I mean, like, if this was a 4th Scourge, I might run it. If this was a 4th Shark Chariot, I would run it. But it's only a Shark Chariot when I've already drawn Shark Chariot, which is so much worse. It's like, it's hard to explain how much worse that is. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice, Swim, didn't you say earlier, you've got like a 67% chance of having Chariot by the time you need it? It's a little less because it comes out on turn 2. But also, the fact that it's a brick in those times, those are the times where I need help the most, when I don't draw Chariot. And it helps me when I already have Chariot. And in those situations, my win rate's already high. If I have 2 Chariot, it doesn't really help me at all. And that represents part of the 67% as well, because I don't really want 3 Chariots. You don't really have room to sustain 3 Chariots. So I don't think Fading Memories is really going to fit in. Safe way to saying if you run Deathmark, you need enablers for it, though. And I don't think this is the best way to get those enablers, personally. But yeah, I mean, I will need some amount of enablers. I think Mark of the Isles is a better way to get Deathmark enablers. Mark of the Isles is a good example. I shouldn't, like, fully cut that yet. I think this definitely might end up being, like, a one-of in the list. We'll see. Oblivious Islander, I think, is just still out. I don't know. I mean, now that we have Scourge, it hits that, like, that 0 mana 2/1 a lot more commonly. Now that we have Scourge and we have Shadowseer and Shark Chariot, it's like if I use it on Chariot or Scourge, which I will have like most of the time when I play Islander, like that's like, what are the odds of me having one or the other? They're pretty high. They're like 80%, maybe a bit shy of 80%, and those are gonna be played in like the next 2 turns. So yeah, it's like a 0 mana 2/1. That's pretty good. Reducing Scourge's mana cost by 1 doesn't really help, I think. Does it? I mean, I still can't play Shark Chariot on 1. I can play Shark Chariot plus a 1 on 2. Honestly, Islander is fairly adorable. Islander is also a target for Conspirator. Yeah. If you're running Conspirator, I think you probably have to run Islander. And Conspirator is really good. Basically, how Islander and Conspirator work together is like, Islander is a 0 mana 2/1, basically, and Conspirator has the downside of returning something to your hand. So this returns to my hand, then I play it again for 0 mana. It's obviously, it costs me 1 mana in the moment, but then it discounts something, so it's kind of like, it's basically 0 mana total. So that kind of turns your Navori Conspirator into a 2/3/2 elusive, which is a really good stat line. Now, this is a high synergy deck, and I might not be able to use like vanilla concepts like that kind of stat line, but I'll put this in and think about maybe like adjusting it later, right? Okay, so we'll look a little further. I don't want Glimpse Beyond in this deck. I've decided Haunted Relic is just a bad card. I'm pretty set on that. Keeper of Masks is honestly a consideration, but this deck is just too tight for it. Navori Highwayman a consideration, but the deck is almost certainly too tight for it. Vile Feast doesn't really work with the game plan of this well enough, I think. Onslaught of Shadows is still in my deck, you'll notice. Onslaught and Scribe are two options that I haven't really thought about enough. I think Onslaught is probably too weak of a card. I think if I want Ephemerals to enable Chariot and Scourge, or sorry, Chariot and Deathmark, I probably would rather get them off of Mark of the Isles instead. You know what? Maybe that's not true. Maybe that isn't true. I mean, this card is not bad. I think Onslaught is slightly worse than Relic. Why do you say that? Because most people seem to agree with that. I've seen a lot of people running Relics, and I've seen 0 people running Onslaught. I think Onslaught is probably just wrong in this list. I felt Sparring Partner was not so good in this deck. It felt only good when I was netting up with Chariots and Ekrim, but when I wasn't hitting anything, it was just a 1-1 buying me the time. See, that's very interesting. I think that actually might be very true. Fresh Offerings. Fresh Offerings is adorable. We just kind of skimmed it there. It's definitely an option. The problem is I think it's still too unreliable. Like, I think this deck is really tight. I mean, this deck is probably tighter than it looks, right? Like, I'm about to cut Onslaught, I'm pretty sure. You know, and Scribe is probably gone too, I don't know. But, like, I mean, we want more Navoris, we want more Islanders, probably, you know? And you'll notice something that happened along the way. I said one thing. I said I'm going to build an aggro version of this deck, and then I'm going to build a mid-range version of this deck. Something very interesting happened, which is basically I noticed that Deathmark and Darkwater Scourge are probably too good to not run, which makes this, maybe instead of building 2 Divergent decks, the best thing to do is just building one deck that kind of is in the middle of those. Because between Deathmark and Darkwater Scourge, I can't really build that, like, real aggro, like, just full proactive, super low to the ground deck that I really wanted. And I think there's maybe too many aggro tools to really turn this into, like, a mid-range deck at the same time. Like, so they'd end up looking pretty similar at that point, right? Fresh Offerings is only good with Haunted Relic. Yeah, I agree. And I don't really like them together. Mana Cost is a big one, do a similar job, unit they proc boards with. It's very close, but the mana cost swings it. I agree. I think they're both bad. Sure, that's fine. But it's easier to just miss Haunted Relic. So that's why we kicked that first. Scribe of Sorrows. When I'm summoned, create a copy in hand of an ally that died this game. Okay, so basically in hand, you're going to have like, so if you play a 1-mana card and if it dies, Scribe of Sorrows can draw it. I mean, this card's very adorable. It's actually really, really cute. Fading Memories will just be a meta call. It's great to use on opposing chariots. Yeah, true. Fading Memories is great to use on opponent's chariots. Absolutely, 100%. So, Scribe of Sorrows creates a copy in hand of an ally that died this game. So, on average, this is going to be like a 1-drop. I guess the dream is to create a copy of Shark Chariot, but again, a card that copies Shark Chariot when you already have one is not really that good. It is kind of like a 3/2/3 that's a draw 1, and the draw it gives you is pretty powerful. I don't know. To be honest, like Scribe is kind of a nuts card. It's kind of crazy good in terms of like the draw value you get out of some of these cards. But I think it might not make the cut. I don't know. Is it better than Iron Harbinger? God, it's probably better than Iron Harbinger, isn't it? So is Iron Harbinger just like straight crap? Because I think Scribe of Sorrows is probably better than it. Losing 1 health kind of hurts a bit, for sure. Like, a 2-4 is a great anti-aggro stat line. And Harbinger does have, like, that synergy, but it's so often it just gets trumped out. Like, attack on a fearsome unit is just, like, really awkward. Harbinger is crap. Tried it for a bit, never liked it. It might be, like, a 2 of... I mean, I still like the idea of a 3-drop and a stat line. And Scribe of Sorrows, the thing about Scribe of Sorrows is it's a 3-drop, but it's not really about coming out on turn 3. That's the problem. But yeah, Scribe could just be better than Harbinger. Again, we're going through and thinking about all the options. There's Solitary Monk, which I think just doesn't really work for this kind of deck, unfortunately. This card is like so close to being just super great, but unfortunate. Steel Tempest, obviously a more control-y, like slowdown card. Can go Wayfinder, not enough. Box is a really good card. I think it's possible I might just want to jam a Box in here. I think this card is just straight up nuts. However, it does kind of play at a slower speed than this deck probably wants to play at. Snapper instead of Harbinger if the stats are the turning point. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And like, honestly, Snapper over Sorrows probably feels better too. I think I'd rather just have like 2 health than sometimes drawing a valuable card. This will always draw a card. I don't know. If it just draws like something, one of these is not really that good. Yeah, we're getting to the cards we want to cut. So this deck is definitely loosening up a bit. I definitely don't mind the idea of running like 1 Rekindler now, to be perfectly honest. Like now, like Darkwater Scourge and Deathmark are slowing down the game. They're making me like not lose to aggro. My Hecarim dying becomes like an unironic part of my lose condition. And like in games where I haven't drawn Hecarim yet, if I'm on turn 6, you look at Rekindler and it'll usually be rezzing like a Zed, right? Like this card is just really high value. It'll often be rezzing a Zed. I've got my anti-aggro. So I look at Rekindler, and I'm thinking this is just an easy, at least 1 of. Could be more like a 2 of, honestly. This card is busted. Like, they're probably going to nerf this card, and I'll probably have to tweak it out of the deck because of it. It's just a busted card. But the deck is still killing people pretty fast, so I don't want anything more expensive than Rekindler. So yeah, I mean, the 1 Rekindler is a great way to kind of top end the list. Could easily be a 2 of, but I think at that point, I feel like I have too many expensive cards. I do want this deck to kind of curve light, right? The most important thing is, like, I'm able to put in the Rekindler because I've got enough good anti-aggro conditions. Like, Rekindler is super high value, and the downside of Rekindler is basically I might lose to aggro. But between Deathmark, Scourge, and even Snapper, if I run Snapper, I think I've got a lot of good win conditions against aggro decks. So I think I'm pretty much fine, honestly, there. And Harbinger is pretty solid for what it is. Snapper would be an okay addition if I need more aggro help. But I think 2 Rekindlers might just be high value as well. I mean, my champions are slightly unfair. If it brings back Zed, it's not even that bad. If it brings back Zed, it's great. 6 mana 5/5 with a Zed, that's usually pretty good. And like sometimes on those turns I'll be needing those. I think I'll run 2 Rekindlers. Again, I think the card is just a little unfair. And the biggest thing here is like I have so much anti-aggro, I just don't think I need to worry about aggro. Like, so again, it's a balancing act, right? Deck building is all about balancing your win conditions against different concepts. You want to play for matchups that you need to help more, and not overplay for matchups that you're already good in, right? So you look at like the Rekindler and you're like, okay, it's a really high value card that basically the only situation it's bad value. Like, and yeah, obviously there's super fringe games where I don't draw a single champ and then Rekindler's a 6 mana 5/5. That's really rare. Even when that happens, it floors at a 6 mana 5/5, which is so crazy. It's so crazy. Like that floor for its like common average effect is so nuts. Normally that kind of common effect would have a really low floor for value, but even if I have that wacko game, it's still good. Even if it reses a Zed, it's still good. If I haven't drawn Hecarim and it reses a Zed, it's still good. If it reses a Hecarim, it's nuts. Like, it's just kind of always good, basically, right? The downside, the one downside is against aggro situations. It has a lot of top end. We have 5-6 cost units, you know, maybe we draw kind of bad hands. So against aggro, we need answers, right? And then we've got Deathmark and Darkwater Scourge. That's a good anti-aggro combo. I mean, against aggro, like, that combo already just kind of wins me the game. Like, that lifesteal will really, really help. That'll be really nuts. We've got even a Harbinger. Even Harbinger is an unironic, not bad anti-aggro card. A 3/2/4 is a solid anti-aggro card. Like, unironically. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a 3-mana 2/4. That's fine. It's like, it doesn't have that 1 health that Snapper has, but I think I'd actually take the Fearsome and the attack effect over Snapper, honestly. That 1 health is a big deal, but a 3/2/4 is fine. Like, this will 2-for-1 against aggro. I'll be able to play it on 3 proactively. That's fine. So I think Harbinger could be more of a 3 of. Again, the important thing to look at this card is an anti-aggro thing. So you look at Rekindler and you're like, okay, there's so much like anti-aggro potential that we have options to. The one downside to this is, like, it might make me a bit weaker against aggro. Now, it's hard to fine-tune this without being able to play the game. We don't know the meta. So we can look at this and we can be like, okay, well, we don't know how much anti-aggro tools we're going to need. But we do have access to enough that I can be confident that 2 Rekindlers is good in this deck, right? Because I can look at this deck and I can be like, if, let's say my aggro matchup's bad, we'll add in, you know, the 3rd Harbinger. Let's say it's bad still, we'll add in more Snappers. We can just make the aggro matchup so good. Like, we have the tools, right? We have the tools that Rekindler's always going to floor at a 2 of here. It could even be a 3 of, which some of you guys are pointing out. I think that's a little too much. I think that's just trolly, but 2 Rekindlers feels very, very solid. A great addition to the list. And again, it makes the list a little bit slower. So at this point, I mean, the question becomes, and here's the question. If we want to make an even slower version of this list, what would it look like? Well, probably run Rasa, right? And now here's the question, right? We've got good anti-aggro. We're thinking about slowing down the list. And this is where we have to go back to that idea of making an aggro version versus like a mid-range version, right? And that's tricky. It's a very tricky concept in terms of a line to walk. Because, like, we've got good anti-aggro. And if we're willing to slow down the speed at which we want to kill our opponent, we can drop some Rosses in here. The more I look at this deck, the more I think that is a good idea. The more I look at this deck, the more I think that a mid-range version of this concept is just better than an aggro version. And this is making me want to cut a few of, like, the aggressive elusive cards, add in, like, 2 Rasas, cut Chariot. I don't think I will cut Chariot. I mean, I think Chariot still kind of, like, got that grind value, because it gives you, like, per turn value, right? But, honestly, I mean, I don't think you really can cut Chariot, right? What's our good anti-aggro in this deck? The options are basically Darkwater Scourge, Deathmark, Scaled Snapper, even like the box if we wanted to, Iron Harbinger. I think the box would fit into more of a mid-range. What would be your early game in the control version? I wouldn't call it a control deck necessarily. It would be more of a mid-range. I think my top end would just be Rasa. I wouldn't use Ladros. I would just have like 2 Rasas as top end. That's the only top end I would add. It would just be 2 Rasa. I wouldn't add Vengeance. I wouldn't add Ruination. I wouldn't add Ladros. It would just be 2 Rasas. Now the question is Rasa hard to enable in a vacuum? And I think the answer is kind of no. Rasa is just kind of too good to ignore. Iron Harbinger seems trash. Harbinger is a great control card, I think. Why Rasa over Ladros? Because it costs 1 less mana, and I need a control condition. Ladros is already kind of overlapping with Hecarim. The whole point of Ladros is to win you a game that you own. It's a finisher for a game that you own, which is just what Hecarim does, right? Hecarim does that too. Whereas Rasa has the ability to stabilize a game that you haven't necessarily quite won yet, and it comes at 1 less mana. So it's not overlapping in terms of, you know, the value that Hecarim is giving me, right? Even Rekindlers are kind of like more Hecarims. You might say, well, what if your Hecarim dies? Well, I've got Rekindler, right? I've got like Rekindler to Z. I have the win conditions. I just need stabilized conditions for those situations happening, right? In a vacuum, you can enable it, but you might not get the specific units you want. So, but again, the more I look at this deck, the more, like, so much of its powerful concepts, like Rekindler, like Rasa, because I'm so close to just adding in Rasa. Like, this card is so good, and it just costs 7 mana. There's nothing wrong with just adding in Rasa. The more I look at this deck, the more, like, I could kill them a bit faster, but what's the point? Like, they're not going to die before 6, because Hecarim has to come out on 6. I've got really powerful 6s and 7s, and I can slow the game down and make sure I don't lose to aggro. So why would I kill them faster? What am I getting by doing that? And I think I'm just getting nothing. I think I think that I'm just kind of diminishing my win rates against certain situations that I don't need to for little reason. I tried Rasa. She's super awkward. That's interesting. I mean, she. Is this a she? You're avoiding the mid-range stuff if you have nothing to deal with it. That's true, but I'm pretty sure like Rekindler and Rasa value should come over the top on like any mid-range scenario, right? I think if anything, aggro is more vulnerable to mid-range than this, right? Like the problem with aggro is that sometimes mid-range decks might be able to stabilize and beat me. This like you run the risk of shutting them out entirely, but you also run the risk of them stabilizing over you, which I think is a bigger risk. Like, this deck should be much better anti-mid-range mirror, for sure. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess I could see Rasa being a little awkward. Is it really that awkward? Does this need more of, like, a control scenario? So, this is a card that I've never played in the game. I've seen played against me, and I've thought about this a lot. It's a really good card in control decks, but maybe you do need the ability to, like, kill off certain units or something like that. Right? Like maybe you do need like black spears and stuff for this to be good. I could see that. So maybe departing from aggro like isn't the best way to do this. Not really. Yeah, I mean I kind of agree. Like Rasa, it's really even if this play effect isn't a huge value, it's really hard for this not to be good value, right? Even without enablers, I end up killing the 2/3s and keeping the big boy alive. Yeah, if they're being forced to block, it's fine. Even if this just kills like 2 small things. That's still like a fine 7-drop. That's kind of crazy. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think I can just kind of slow down the speed of this deck a bit. Like, I can slow it quite a bit down and build what I would consider to be a fairly different deck. And the more I look at it, the more we kind of have built the aggro version. You know what? I could save the aggro version. I guess I should do that. I should do that thing I was going to do at the start and like actually save the 2 different versions. But the more I think about it, the more this deck shouldn't even really be trying to play aggressive. Let's just save it. Let's finish the aggro version first. Let's set out to, you know, do what we started. So aggro version, I can still run 2 Rekindlers because like even in a deck that's like not trying to slow it down, trying to kill people, we decided Rekindler's value before we even shifted our mentality. Scribe of Sorrows might be a little too mana expensive for the identity of like an aggro version list. So I think Scribe can probably go. We've got 3 Harbingers as something that's going to be maybe getting cut down to 2 in an aggro version. And the Void Conspirator is good when you have Islander as well. And Islander's better with Scourge. The Void Conspirator is pretty good in like a more aggressive version. Now the one comment made before was Sparring Student can sometimes just brick out majorly. Especially without Haunted Relic. That could actually be true. I could actually start cutting down on Sparring Students a bit. I don't know. This card's average value just seems a little too high. I think I like 2 Silent Shadow Seers. It's just like good kind of like over-the-top reach when you need it, right? So 2 Conspirators, 1 Islander, and 1 Mark of the Isles. We're almost done with the aggro version. I mean, this is like pretty refined right now. So you can look at like Islander and Mark of the Isles. I think I will just cut out Mark of the Isles. I think that's fine. Because Conspirator is kind of a nuts card. It really helps the aggro condition as well. Harbinger is more of an anti-aggro card than an aggro card. So I can run like Islander as a 2F here. And I think this looks pretty good. Like this looks like a solid aggro version to me. Like basically this. It's not as I think running the deck at a faster speed than this is probably a mistake. Just an easy mistake. Because like at the end of the day, 3 Scourges, 2 Death Marks, and 2 Rekindlers are just feels good, right? If we're worried about opponents like getting under us, there's other solutions to that. This is not a perfect version of the list. Cut 1 Rekindler. Yeah, honestly, cutting 1 Rekindler in this version I think is fine. So, since we are trying to be like more aggressive, and I do like Harbinger as a 2-of. I don't like having to cut the 3rd Harbinger. Okay, so this is kind of my aggro version. Honestly, a couple of the ratios probably would be adjusted if I spent more time on this. The fact that I kind of, in my head, decided I do think the mid-range version is probably a bit better means I don't want to, like, spend too much time on, like, fully perfecting this. but we'll just call this Swim Chariot Aggro. Save it as aggro, and that'll be our aggro version of the deck. Again, we're going back all the way to like 30 minutes ago where we, you know, delineated the idea of like, you know, this is step 4. This is where we create the 2 different versions. And then in theory, step 5 would be like bringing it to ladder and like, you know, testing and but looking at the anti-meta. We can't do that here in this video, but what we are going to do is we are going to basically do, I'm going to tell you about it. That's what step 5 would be. Taking it to ladder, looking at like, you know, what cards are good in what matchups, perfecting matchups, being like, okay, I've got a good winner right here, and this card is good against control matchups at control speed, so like we can cut that down and help our aggro matchups or vice versa. Like that's the final step in like the deck building process, right? But yeah, so now what we can do is we can go ahead and now that we have saved this, here, give me 1 second. Death masking your Shadow Seer is pretty funny to play as well. Yeah, that's pretty adorable too. So this was Chariot Aggro. Let's go ahead and import, so we can just export, import, copy code. It's kind of a, yeah, I mean, you basically just have to, I have to make like a new copy of it here. And this one is going to be the mid-range version, which we, you know, we just switched over to. So imported this. Oops, I messed up. It's supposed to be edit. Okay, so now let's build this at like an actual mid-range speed, okay? So Rekindler, this is good for this. Harbinger is probably more of a 3 of, I think. Harbinger is like very anti-aggro. It comes out a bit slower, so I think it should be more of a 3 of in a deck like this. I think Sparring Student might just be out. Rush is definitely out. Islander, I think the idea of like Islander is probably out too, right? Like there's just so many cards that just feel like a little fast for no reason. Like they don't really help my overall win condition. At the end of the day, my win condition comes down to these. So now the question is, if the deck is slow enough, we can cut Zed. Here's the issue. Zed is a little nuts. Like, here's what we have to think about. So like, we could think about running Thresh over Zed. Let's actually, instead of just beelining to Thresh, let's look at our options. Champions. It's possible I'm like just going too far away here. It's like, this is more of a theory than something that's like super set in stone in terms of just, I just looking at the cards, I feel like I would want this as a mid-range deck. So I'm going to look at these and build this mid-range version. In theory, this should be better, but theories can be wrong sometimes. Maybe just the aggro deck is the more stable concept. We'll see, right? Zed is getting nerfed 100%. You might as well cut him. Yeah, I mean, he is kind of bad. And if we are running Rekindlers, and like slowing the game down, then we could just cut him. So here's the thing. The one thing, and this happens in deck building sometimes, it happens a lot, it's actually very, very common, especially if you're a good deck builder and you know what you're doing, is that your deck turns into something else. And we kind of see the makings of that here. Like, if we cut Zed, I mean, at that point, like, Chariot's also not that good. And then we're running, like, a mid-range deck that uses Hecarim as a finisher. And then at that point, Hecarim shouldn't even be the finisher. The finisher should be something else, right? You know, like if we're running Thresh +1, you know, why are we even in Ionia at this point? And the whole concept just gets thrown out the window, right? So it's really, really important to kind of like figure out, do we still want to be in this style of deck? Because it's true that Shadow Isles has really nuts bomb cards. Like Rekindler and Rasa are both crazy cards. I think these cards are both insane. And that kind of forces Shadow Isles to not, it's not an excellent aggro region. It has good aggro options, but it just has such amazing mid-range and control options. And there's kind of better regions to play at like aggro speeds, right? So the thing is, can you even build this deck at a slower speed without it warping into something else? Is that even possible? Because like, think about it. If we're not closing out the game on that turn, if we cut Zed, I think that's the point where it just is a different deck. I think we can't cut Zed. Right? Like, even if we're okay killing at slightly slower speeds, Zed, if we cut Zed, the whole arch falls apart. Everything crumbles, right? Early game chip damage, 6 or 7 mana burst finisher. That's the game plan. Yes, exactly. But with a little more ability to kind of like sustain if games do end up going a little bit longer, right? Shark Chariot is a card with no value defensively in a deck trying to win later. Chariot seems iffy. Well, we're not necessarily trying to win later. We're trying to be more well-rounded, basically. Like, we're sort of opening both options. And we're not really trying to win on late turns. We're just running, like, Rekindler and Rasa for the ability to basically just, like... Because these are still big bomb cards. Like, on the turn they are played, they're still good bombs. Rasa could be more like a one-of. I don't know. I mean, and then there's another consideration, which is kind of weird. Maybe this did get away. Maybe the aggro version is kind of the best way to run this. Because this is definitely feeling a little weird at this point. I think Chariot does need to kill its opponent on a clock. But 7 drops could fit into that clock. There's nothing really wrong with that. Rasa might be more of a one-of. But yeah, I mean, if in this version we would be out of Rush. And it does look like, the more I think about it, and the more we're kind of imagining this list in our head. I'm sorry I'm not saying all of the things in my head. Sometimes, like, I have that problem where I'm thinking about something and I'm not saying it out loud because it's hard to verbalize everything. But the more I look at this, the more I think I was wrong about the mid-range concept. And it's true that a mid-range Shadow Isles deck could be good, and maybe it's better than this, but at that point it would become a different deck, right? I think if you want to be in Shark Chariot Hecarim, you do need to be closing out games just early. And I think that's pretty inescapable, right? Which is, you know, I mean, that's pretty much what everyone already thought. That's not a hot take at this point, right? That's not a hot take at all. But the more I look at this, the more we can't really slow it down. I mean, we could maybe add like a third Rekindler, or we could add a Rasa. But I think I don't actually really like adding Rasas to this. I think adding Rasa to this is actually a bad idea. It's a nuts card, but it's just a little too heavy. And I really want the ability to just be dominating the early game. So, now that we've kind of established this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go scrap this option. It's done. I've thought about it in my head. We tried to do it in the head. It didn't even... Like, you didn't even see most of the things I was thinking about, but it just ended up not really working in my head. So now we go back to the aggro version, which is, I think, yeah, the one true version of, like, Chariot, right? Now, Rekindler might be more of a 2-of. Maybe. Rekindler. And you can have both as well. Now... there's one important thing from a meta standpoint, which is the idea of having 2 decks that look the same. In a meta system, and metas are just like living ecosystems, basically, right? And I think it's really important to think about metas like that. They are complex. They're actual ecosystems. In a meta ecosystem, 2 decks that look the same but play at different speeds are actually pretty valuable. They create like a symbiotic relationship where they basically empower each other. That's very unhealthy to the meta, basically. Because, like, let's say Chariot aggro is a tier 1 deck, and let's say Chariot midrange is a tier 2 deck. Let's just say. They both get better because they both exist. Because the other exists. Because when someone's playing against, you know, they click on my deck and they see Hecarim Zed, they don't know which speed they're playing against. And it'll mess up the opponent's mulligans. And that seems like a small deal, but it's a pretty big deal. Both decks will feed each other percentage points on their own win rate because they both exist as meta entities. That's a big deal, right? So in theory, maybe there is a room for a mid-range deck to kind of be a parasite on the meta, right? Basically just like, you know, force a higher degree of win rate for both decks in that way, right? So, we're not necessarily sure that mid-range is going to make enough sense to be worth doing in this case. I kind of don't think so, but there's definitely a lot of options, you know. I mean, these are the reasons why people run their own individual deck cards, right? Like, maybe you run Market the Isles in this deck, and maybe you get some value out of that. So I think Rekindler is more likely a 2-of than a 1-of. In a stable version of the list. It kind of feels hard for Harbinger to not be a 3-of, honestly. But maybe this card is actually just kind of shit. And like the slower speed of like, there is a slightly slower speed that this deck can play at. I could slow it down a bit. I could have some kind of middle ground where I'm not running Rasas, but I am using like Scribe of Sorrows. I think Scribe of Sorrows is kind of a busted card, actually. Scribe of Sorrows is actually a little unfair, to be perfectly honest. So here's Scribe of Sorrows. So, oops. Wait, did I spell it wrong? Scribe of Sorrows. Didn't I spell that right? Am I dumb? Wait. What the heck? Yeah, Mobalytics like search engines are kind of buggy sometimes. Anyway, okay, Scribe of Sorrows. A meta is really constricting when there's a really powerful aggro and control deck. Yes, exactly right. That's good meta understanding right there. That's exactly correct. Like meta is basically because they kind of trap you between the action. You don't know, you can't really tech against one or the other without losing to both. And that's exactly correct. It's the same exact logic where two decks team up to feed each other win rate points. When you have an aggro deck and a control deck, and one of them plays at a very fast speed and one of them plays at a very slow speed, any deck that tries to beat one will kind of lose to the other, right? That's exactly right. You have a sort of like, they team up as gatekeepers to the meta. You saw the same thing in Gwent as well. It wasn't about speed in that game. It was about reactivity. Basically, that's how triangles worked in Gwent. So you'd have a very powerful proactive deck and a very powerful reactive deck, basically. Or sorry, not proactive. No. It was two types of proactive. You'd have like value decks and engine decks, and they would team up to make like you can't control them and you can't outvalue them either, right? But yeah, that's correct. It was value decks and engine decks that teamed up in Gwent. Okay, so I look at Scribe of Sorrows and I see this card is kind of nuts, and there's a specific reason why, right? So you look at, it has the ability to create a copy in hand of an ally that died this game, so that can summon another Chariot. Let's look at Fading Memories. Fading Memories is a second Chariot when we have a Chariot. It is a second Shadow Seer when we have a Shadow Seer, and it's a second Scourge when we have a Scourge. I don't really like those. What it is, however, is an anti-meta tech card against the opponent's Chariot. The ability to put a Chariot on the opponent's board, take a Chariot when you don't have one drawn from the opponent's board is a big deal, right? And even, like, there's probably one or two, like, weird circumstances where the opponent will have some card that has, like, a crazy powerful battle cry that you can clone, and it could be an anti-meta against, like, those things as well. Okay. So, let's look at Scourge and compare it to Fading Memories. Or not Scourge, god damn it, Sorrows. Scribe of Sorrows, okay? It's kind of the same logic. When you have a Chariot, it's a second Chariot. Here's the big deal. Having a second Chariot when you have a Chariot is not a bad thing. The one thing that is bad sometimes, though, is when you don't have the Chariot, you look at Fading Memories and you're like, what the hell am I going to do with this? I don't really want a second Shadow Seer. A second Scourge is kind of okay, but I might just want another clone of something else that died. And I look at Scribe of Sorrows as something that could be a better version of Chariot, basically, if that makes sense, right? Or, sorry, not Chariot, but a better version of the Fading Memories Chariot. A better way to clone extra Chariots, right? Because if you have a Chariot that's like died already, you know, well, look at that. You've got another Chariot, or at the very least good odds at another Chariot. And when you don't have that yet, you know, it's kind of like a Zed. It's like a power 3 drop. When you don't have that yet, then, you know, you will probably just get back like Sparring Student, Mentor, or Islander. Can it get Zed back? Yeah, it looks like it can. Scribe of Sorrows. Like, it just says create a copy in the hand of an ally that died this game. So it's a little rare for it to get Zed back, because Zed would have had to be the only thing that's died, but that can happen sometimes. So I'm looking at Scribe of Sorrows, and I do like this card in this deck. I think it's a good card in this deck. I think it's just solid. It's probably a 1 of or a 2 of. It's definitely not a 3 of. I think it's actually more likely a 1 of than anything else. It's the kind of card that can round out my curve a little bit. You know, it's probably better than a Harbinger, I guess. Like, that extra health is really nice against aggro stuff, but you don't really need it. You've got kind of better ways of doing it. So Sorrows could be more of a 2 of. And yeah, maybe Harbinger is just out. So I'm looking at like this kind of triangle of like Islander and Conspirator. And honestly, like, the more I look at this deck, the more, as much as I like Navori Conspirator, I don't think it works for the speed this deck wants to play at. This deck is throttled on its mana usage pretty hard. It's got a high mana cost. It really does. I need to save up more mana, and Conspirator and Islander aren't really like... Islander is a 0 mana card, so it kind of does save more mana. Ugh. But Conspirator is like... It's just a 2/3/2 elusive. That's like... You can pay 1 extra to give something +1/+1. I don't know, every time you buff Zed with Mentor, that's really good too. Zed is kind of the only good thing to buff with Mentor. Man, Conspirator is just so good. What the hell? How is this even fair? How is this card even this good? Like, what on earth? And I think, by the way, for those of you guys who haven't noticed yet, I think we're almost done with this list. It's like, it's reaching basically the end. Like, I think this is almost done. This is almost a done list. And yeah, step 5 is like anti-meta, which we just can't do. Like, even if we could play the game right now, until there is a meta, we can't really tweak it to... you know, deal with the meta, right? Fading Memory Chariot when you attack. Well, but that doesn't really do anything, right? Scribe is good, but not with Iona aggro stuff. Seems like another separation from the deck itself. It could be a little bit, but the thing is, like, these Iona aggro cards aren't really meant to be closing out the game early, right? And that's part of the reason I think Sparring Student might come down a bit. It's a little win more. I mean, I flood the board. I don't know. Greenglade Duo is like more so a consideration to come down the Student. And it feels like Shadowseer. It feels hard to get away with from 2 Shadowseer when I might need it for enabling Deathmark. I could cut one of the Shadowseers, I think. I don't think I would have a problem with that. I could cut the 1 Harbinger. I mean, at this point, I do have to worry about aggro. My anti-aggro is pretty light. I mean... I've slowed the deck down. I still have, like, I can't race down aggro decks. Harbinger is actually decent anti-aggro, whereas, like, Silent Shadowseer is really bad anti-aggro. And, like, these elusive cards, like Greenglade Duo, I can't race the aggro, right? I have to stall them. I can't race them at all. So Greenglade Duo is starting to feel kind of bad. Is that the thing? Do we cut down on Greenglade Duo? Out of all things? That feels so insane to do, though. Oh, this last cut is hard. It could just be like Rush. Like, I don't need 2 rushes. For sure. Duo is better than Harbinger. I mean, it doesn't matter which one's better. If I need anti-aggro, Harbinger's better. Like, it doesn't... Like, Harbinger doesn't even have to be in the deck. Like, it could be a Scaled Snapper. Is Duo better than Scaled Snapper? I don't think so. Like, the most important thing, like, you look at this list... The fact that I added more top end and took away Harbingers means I now need anti-aggro solutions. This deck loses to aggro for no reason. It doesn't matter which card is better or which card is worse. My deck has the ability to beat control decks, and Greenglade Duo is a powerful card, but it doesn't play for the speed that my deck is playing at, right? Not at all. Snapper. There's a consideration for Snapper to actually be ahead of Harbinger, to be perfectly honest. That 1 health goes a long way. Attack, grant me +1 attack for each ephemeral ally. Do you guys think this is literally just worse than Snapper? That 1 health is a pretty big deal. And Harbinger, it's true that he has 2 words on him that do things. I don't know. I think his 2 sentences that he has on him are both, and one of them is only 1 word. Like, it's true that 1 health can matter in a lot of situations. But these can matter a lot too. In this deck, Snapper does what you want better, Fearsome doesn't do much. I do agree with that. But, I mean, at that point, maybe Harbinger isn't the cut and something like Duo is, right? The attack buff can block more units too. What do you mean the attack buff can block more units too, exactly? You don't usually have ephemeral units while blocking. So defensively, Harbinger is a shitty Snapper. Well, he has gained permanent attack though, right? I like Duo Cut. I think Duo Cut makes the most sense. I mean, even if we think Snapper is better than Harbinger, you can trade with better creatures. Yeah, that's what I figured you meant. Even if we think Snapper is better than Harbinger, like, that doesn't mean that Harbinger should be cut. I do think this deck probably wants to run like at least 2 snappers in it. And that's therein lies the problem. This deck is trying too hard to be a super aggro deck. I unironically think that some of the elusive or sparring students should get cut. Like, there's some problems here. Maybe Oblivious Islander plus Navori Conspirator, honestly. Like, these 5 cards could all just get cut. I could totally cut Islander plus Navori Conspirator. I think I have no problems just cutting these cards. Greenglade Duo is a little too efficient. Doesn't die to much. And the Swarm is still there. I think I will cut Conspirator and Islander. Because Conspirator is also only good when I've drawn Mentor, which is a bad condition. So I think I will just take that cut. And I'm going to load up my 3 drops. So the problem is we've got a bunch of units competing for 3. I think Scribe could be a 2 of. And Scaled Snapper feels more like this. Just cut all your reach. I mean, this isn't really an aggro deck. I want to be killing people at faster than like actual control speeds. I like Iron Harbinger because most of the time with defense you don't have a good turn 3 play. Yeah, well, Snapper's probably better. Maybe. I don't know. It's hard. I mean, Harbinger, don't get me wrong. Like, I agree that Harbinger, like, promises more than it delivers. But I don't think this card is poo-poo. Like, it could be better than Snapper. It's good anti-aggro, which is what the deck wants. It's a 3/2/4 that has a bonus text on it. This could easily be better than Snapper. I think it and Snapper are very similar. The Snapper basically doesn't have text, by the way. Snapper is a 3/2/5. You're never really playing this as a 3/5/2. Someone in chat was saying like an hour ago that they think 3/5/2s are actually good in Runeterra. I guess I would be curious as to why that would be. I don't think that really makes sense. A 3/5/2 is a really, really weak stat line that you usually can't really control very well. Most Iron Harbinger, because most of the time on defense, yeah, it makes sense. Islander reducing Hecarim is insane pressure on turn 5. That's true, and if you have the Rekindler in your hand, then maybe you can make plays like that, right? So it's possible Islander has to fit in the deck. Snapper is better and Scribe generates card advantage. If you're getting rid of 3, I think Harbinger. I think Scribe might be bad. I don't know. I mean, even against anti-aggro, you can usually block like 2 things. I mean, aggros have like some 2 attack units that you can just kill with Snapper. Or, sorry, Scribe. We're on the 5/2 in a Challenger deck, maybe? Yeah. The 5/2 can still trade up. The Nox 2 mana 5/1 Challenger trades up like crazy. Yeah, that's because it has Challenger. I mean, it needs Challenger to do that. It's a pretty close one. We're getting into like the fine-tuning decisions, and then there's some people saying we shouldn't have cut Islander and Conspirator, which I'm definitely open to. You know, there's arguments like, for example, making Hecarim 5, especially now that we have Rekindlers, making Hecarim 5. Like, if we have both Hecarim, Rekindler, and Islander, which isn't high odds, and Islander gets played early, and this is after Mulligan. Like, Islander on Hecarim kind of forces you to keep Hecarim in hand, right? You don't want to keep Hecarim in hand. I don't think this deck keeps Hecarim in hand. I guess you do. Yeah, I don't think this deck keeps Hecarim in hand. Maybe I'm wrong. I guess it would depend on the matchup, but against aggro, you wouldn't. So, yeah, I mean, we definitely are a bit less aggressive now. Getting out of Rush might make more sense. Islander might be a little... It's so mana efficient, though. I think the Islander, I think, is a little too good. Now that I'm thinking about it. And Conspirator, maybe we can keep as like a 2 of or something like that. Just so like it always hits something to bounce. It always hits your Islander or your Mentor. Because we do have like a bit more anti-aggro than I think we need. Scribe can just be a 1 of, honestly. And then we just cut 2 of the anti-aggro. So the final question. Harbinger versus Scaled Snapper. Which is better? Like, as much as I like Snapper, and Snapper is a really good card, I mean, I don't think Harbinger is as bad as you guys think. I think you guys are looking at the card wrong. Like, Harbinger's not really supposed to be this crazy good card. It's supposed to be an anti-aggro tool that sometimes gets value out of this text. That's it. Like, Harbinger looks bad because you guys are looking at this like it's supposed to be some crazy good thing, but it's not. It's just anti-aggro. It's just a 3/2/4 that has text on it that does things sometimes. Right? Like, I think Harbinger is probably better than Snapper. I do like the idea of being edgy and cutting it for Snapper, but I think this is probably just better. So we have like the amount of 3-drops that we have. 1 Harbinger, 1 Scribe, and these. And this deck might be complete right now. We could maybe think about like taking out Rush. You know, if we're getting like a lot of chip damage, that 1 Rush has a pretty good threat. And we look at this deck and I feel pretty good about it. 2 Conspirators with 6 targets to bounce means we've got great ratios at drawing unbricked Conspirators, which is good. You know, I'm fine with cutting Conspirator down a little bit just to lower the odds of drawing a Conspirator without either a Mentor or an Islander, because when you don't have Mentor or Islander, but you do have Conspirator, Conspirator does feel pretty bad. Two Shadow Seers gives me the reach options at the end. We have like the Harbinger and the Scribe are divided into like 1-ofs each, and there could be some way to like optimize that. At the end of the day, it's like it's really hard to optimize these like very final decisions, because of course we have the idea of like, you know, we don't know what kind of meta we're going to be against. If there's a ton of aggro and we're worried about our aggro win rate, those are 2 separate points. But if both of them are true, then we'd happily cut Sorrows for a second Harbinger. Or even we might think about cutting both Harbingers for 2 Snappers, right? Because, I mean, it is better anti-aggro, right? You've got 2 Denies, just generally good. I could see the ratios shift around here, but I'm just a big fan of 2 Denies, 2 Death Marks, 2 Rekindlers. I've kind of been explaining this as I go, but this is, I think, where I'm kind of landing on my current version of the deck right now, right? And I think, like, throughout this process, it took us, God, how long was this? This was like 2 hours. This was a while. But through this process, we went through like a bunch of different steps. This is kind of like a lot of how I approach deck building as a whole. And obviously, we're going to be pretty limited when we can't play the fucking game, right? Like there's not a lot we can do there. But I think this is a pretty good version of the deck that I've come to, and I'm pretty happy to like look at and play on the early turns. I think that's going to be good. Cut 1 Conspirator for Harbinger. To be honest, I think at this point, our ratios of 3-drops are good, right? With 3 Scourge, 3 Zed, like 1 Scribe of Sorrows, like, I do want more anti-aggro, and that's fine. Like, that's something we could do, but I'm kind of worried about having too many 3-drops. I haven't really been talking about Curve, honestly, throughout this time, just because I think Curve is pretty easy. It's very basic. A lot of people understand Curve already, but that's another big factor as well. You'll notice we have no 4s and 5s, and that's fine. The 4s and 5s are where we're going to be, like, doubling up on these options. And then we're just going to be bombing out on 6 and 7, right? That's kind of the idea. So, yeah, this is my version of the list as it exists right now. There will have a couple of problems, but you'll notice, like, through this process, we tried to make an aggro, we tried to make a mid-range deck. We decided aggro was probably better for the tools that these had as options, but the version of aggro is kind of mid-range leaning. We've got Scourge, Deathmark, 2 Rekindlers, and on top of that, even a Scribe of Sorrows. These are all like slower cards that play for more so the mid-range condition than the aggro condition. Even Iron Harbinger is like, this card is sort of more mid-range than aggro in a weird way, because it's anti-aggro, and if you're aggro, you kind of don't need anti-aggro, but it's impossible for these decks to be fast enough to never not need anti-aggro, because they do rely on Hecarim. So even if a faster version of the deck existed, it would still need to have some anti-aggro tools. Seems like some random 1-ofs IMO. Yeah, there's 3 1-ofs in this deck, which is a bit higher than like normal refined lists should have. Lots of decks that are more refined would have probably more like 1 or 2 1-ofs in them. But I think this is fine for about as well we can do right now. I don't really mind. Like 3 1-ofs I think is a pretty acceptable ratio. Okay, and that is, you know, deck building 101. Well, we went through a ton of concepts in this like 2 hours. I think the 2-ofs are kind of necessary, by the way. I mean, I agree with you guys that are saying like lots of 1-ofs, but I mean, all the 2-ofs that I have are basically like necessary 2-ofs. So I gotta say, I like the composition of your camera today. What do you have? Composition you got going on in your cam? I don't know what you mean by that exactly. What is composition? I know people talk about it in like when we're talking about movies, What does composition mean? Like art. Composition. What does it actually mean? Like people talk about like, you know, camera angles, composition. Does it just mean like everything? It's the things that are in the picture. Oh, I see. All 2ofs are potential bricks. Rarely want 2 in hand at any point in the game. Yeah. That's one last thing. Like when you look at 2ofs, it's pretty easy. Yeah, 2ofs are potential bricks. 2ofs are good cards that you rarely want more than one of. I guess like this is one last point that I think is important. 2ofs are cards. So here's how deck building works. I think a lot of people look at ratios as a 1of is a card you really don't want 2 of. A 2of is a card that you kind of don't want 2 of, and a 3of is a card you want as many of as possible, basically. Which is not really how it works. 3ofs are your power cards. You just want them. They're proactive. They don't really brick. The 2ofs are the cards that you're worried about bricking, right? The 2ofs in deck building work like how most people think 1ofs work. 2ofs are cards that you just don't want to see 2 of, but they're pretty powerful. Conspirator could be more of a 3of in this deck. It's got that wiggle room. It could be one or the other. But Shadow Seer is like, it's a good card, but I mostly want it to enable Deathmark if I didn't draw Scourge. I don't want to draw 2 of it. Conspirator. Honestly, for the most part, I don't want to draw 2 of this. Deny, I don't really want to draw 2 of this. Deathmark, I don't really want to draw 2 of this. And Rekindler, I don't really want to draw 2 of this. Now, you might say, well, Swim, you don't want to draw 2 Akrams either. And that's true, but I really, 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 really want the first Akram. Like, too much. I want that too much. So I can't have it as a 2 of, right? Now, what 1ofs are, I think a lot of people misattribute the concept of 1ofs in deck building. They're a lot more about filling up certain curves than they are. Like, at the end of the day, if there's a card you don't want 2 of, if it's good enough to be in your deck, you should run 2 of it. Because if you have 2 of the card, you're going to draw 1 of them. And if you draw both of them, then that's low odds, and you can complain about that when it happens, and it will happen sometimes. But if there's a card that you want enough to be in your deck, that you want to draw 1 of, putting a second copy of the card will increase your odds of drawing just 1 of that card, right? If that makes sense. Because yeah, on rare occasions, you will draw both of them. But you're eliminating the conditions where you don't draw any of them at all. And if the card is worth playing, it's worth trying to draw 1 of, right? That's the important thing to understand. A 1of in deck building, and why they're kind of rare, is more of a curve rounder than anything else, right? So for example, you know, I look at these 1ofs and I say, like, you know, maybe like this one trick will have some ratio, like it'll hit enough times where you're going to find like good enough value that like this will basically smooth out my mana curve, right? You look at like Iron Harbinger and Scribe of Sorrows. Now, both of these cost the same mana, but they do slightly different things. And Scribe of Sorrows is something that I think there's kind of no reason to draw 2 of. So I think that some of you guys in chat are saying having these 1ofs is probably wrong, and that's true. These 1ofs between Rush, Harbinger, and Scribe of Sorrows, at the end of the day, I don't know in what direction I would optimize that. I am almost 100%. The next step of this deck is to cut out of one of these and add to another one, right? But without playing and without seeing what the meta is, it's really hard to figure out what which one to do it with. So that's true. I agree with that. These 1ofs probably shouldn't be here. These 3 1ofs, but it's without playing, it's too hard to say like which one should go and which one should end up with. Because typically optimized decks have only 1 or 2 1ofs, and this has 3, which is kind of a little higher than you would like. 1ofs are pretty rare. And you'll also notice, like, I defined them as the idea of a curve rounder, but 2 of them are kind of on the same curve, like Harbinger and Sorrows. So both of them existing as cards in 1of capacities doesn't really exist, right? How I would explain this, and this is going to be my last statement, basically. The best way to explain this is a 1 out of 40, because there's 40 cards in the deck. 1 out of 40 is just like, it's too low odds to represent anything. Right? If it's some expensive top-end card, like a super control card, like a 9-mana card, like the Ruination or something, games are going to be slow enough that you've got decent odds to draw it. And drawing 2 is like hyper brick, right? But in most scenarios, the 1of that exists for the idea of just like, I really don't want to draw 2 of this, is almost not at all how they work, right? So again, how they work is curve smootheners. But a better way of looking at that is to look at it not as a one of, but as a discount version of something you already have, right? So like a good example of that might be, you know, let's say, let's say I were to put, there's an easier way of doing this. Let's say I put a Navori Blade Scout in the deck, right? I think that's a fine example. Like if I had this as a one of in the deck, like I just click that in right now. The way to think about it is it's not a one of Navori Blade Scout. What this is this is a 10 of one drop, right? So when I put this in, this isn't me saying I really want one Blade Scout. It's instead me saying, well, I've got 3 Mentors, 3 Students, 3 Islanders. I want a 10th one drop for whatever reason, and maybe I don't, but maybe I do. I want a 10th one drop, but I don't need 11. But 10 is like, 10 is good enough to the point where that's what I mean by when I say curve smoother. So you don't, one of you're not really supposed to look at as that card itself, but usually it's going to be a kind of slightly weaker version of something you already have, but you want an extra copy of that thing, right? So maybe this is weaker than these, but it's like a one-off, right? So, and that's exactly why the idea of running like one of Harbinger and one of Sorrows probably doesn't make sense, right? Almost certainly like one of those should be cut for the other or for Rush or something like that. So that's it. This is still going to be the version I publish just because like I can't really be sure which one until I know like what the meta is going to be like. This is a very, very clean list. All the 2-ofs are 2-ofs because, you know, for reasons. And I think this list will perform pretty well. I mean, again, after building it for so long, there's only so much we can do without playing the actual game itself. But this is a pretty refined version. I think when we jump into the game and actually start playing in 2 months, let's assume they're not going to nerf things, although they will. But if they didn't nerf things, I'm pretty confident in saying I wouldn't swap more than like a few cards. Like I would swap a few if I got into a game and there's like a meta, and then there's the meta on top, which we would have to predict, and the meta swap might be more than a few cards. But just in terms of like this list and how it wants to be constructed, this is fairly close, I think, right? And I wanted to do this process, this like long deck build process, to kind of show like all the different steps, all the different important ways that you can like, you know, a lot of deck building fundamentals, but also, you know, to show like there's a lot of scenarios where I think you aren't necessarily going to need a meta, right? Where theory crafting can get you so far. And these things are really great to think about, especially for the next like 2 months where we aren't going to be able to play the game, right? All right, that's it. That's the end. For those of you guys who don't know, so the people on my Twitch are really confused right now, but this is on YouTube as well, what I just did. And now this is where I say I'm ending the video on the YouTube, and then, you know, goodbye, YouTube, YouTube persona, like and drop a fat like. Something about the bell thing. I don't know what that does, but YouTubers are always going on about ringing their bell. So yeah, ring my bell, daddy.